Well, it sounded like to me you were saying that, well, under patriarchy, there's a greater likelihood of there being warfare. So under matriarchy...
The point I was trying to illustrate by bringing that up is that for the vast majority of history and probably going forward, men have been the ones to hold the majority of political office.
But it's not necessarily because they're men.
Not necessarily, but it's one factor, yes.
Like,
you agree at least that it's one factor?
For example, if somebody's victim of a crime and they happen to be black, does it necessarily mean that they were they were victimized because of their skin color?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
It's probably going to be socioeconomic.
So other sort of discrepancies, just because a discrepancy exists, doesn't necessarily mean that it's because of, something occurred to somebody because of their gender, because of their race, because of X, whatever trait you want to attribute.
That's the patriarchy, babes. It lives throughout all of us. It can be upheld by men and women, is my point. Because you're speaking to, we're both, I feel like we're kind of talking past each other because we mostly agree that there's examples of men starting warfare, women starting warfare, and it playing off each other, and it not even necessarily coming down to gender specifically.
I have a question,
It just happens to have been the case that men have exercised it.
Was the patriarchy stronger 100 years ago?
Yeah.
It was strong.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So would it be to the supposed patriarchy's benefit if women were not allowed to vote?
Yes.
Yeah.
So explain to me how in 1920, or I guess 1918, or throughout the 1910s, the suffrage movement, how could it be if men had a stranglehold on the right to vote, and we were under like a very brutal patriarchy, why did men who had all the control, why did they relinquish their supposed control to women?
Couldn't we use the same? Wait. No, wait.
Well, answer the question.
Couldn't we use the same analogy when it comes to like the Civil Rights Act, for example? Like, why did white people who hold the majority of power give black people like the right to vote or whatever? And that answer is the same.
Well, I think gender and race is a little different.
Yeah, but the basis principle is the same. It was a greater amount of protest, social pressure. It was people basically saying like, hey, if you don't do this, we're gonna like revolt, riot, etc.
I think it's absolutely right that we gave all people the right to vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
I'm in favor of women being able to vote.
Yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't answer my question. If there was a patriarchy and it was to men's benefit to maintain men as a gender, because you kind of try to bring it to race for some reason. No, if it was to the patriarchy's benefit for men to be able to maintain power, why did they allow, and there was a patriarchy, why did they allow women the right to vote?
The patriarchy is a system that can be amended and changed over time, which is why it was weaker now than it was 100 years ago.
But there is no grand, here's the thing.
During the 1920s.
This is like a feminist conspiracy theory that there's a patriarchy, because it's just a conspiracy.
You just agreed that 100 years ago women didn't have the right to vote because of men.
I can give you a better parallel that doesn't involve race.
Not because of men.
I can give you a better parallel that doesn't involve race. Do you know who President...
Wait, I actually want Pixie to answer the question though. How could it conceivably be when men did have the power, and if there is and was a patriarchy, and if that patriarchy was much stronger 100 years ago, why did the patriarchy opt to basically surrender its power to women if there was a patriarchy?
Because
during
that time, 1910 to 1920s, correct me if I'm wrong, World War I, right? Around that, or World War II?
No, it's World War I.
World War I.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is it? Social dynamics were changing. Women started getting more into the workforce as well. Women started applying more social pressure. The suffragettes were literally inciting bombings and such. So yeah, a level of social pressure causes people on top to get scared and change stuff, just like it's happened throughout history. Like, that doesn't mean that the power structure didn't exist. It just means that it's amendable to change with enough pressure.
They had to shift it to stay in power.
Exactly.
Yeah,
here's my
violence.
Yes.
Mine that didn't involve race. Do you know who President FDR was?
Yes.
The New Deal? You're familiar with this? Okay, the New Deal was actually proposed.
Wait, what's going on back there? Wait. Hello? Huh? What?
Hello.
Are you guys coming back or?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so you're familiar with FDR and the New Deal, yes?
Yes.
That was actually proposed as a compromise to socialism. to maintain capitalism. Like FDR basically did the New Deal to save capitalism, because he said if we do not compromise in this way and give people basically civic infrastructure, some free healthcare, all of these things, they're going to revolt and want socialism. So similarly with patriarchy, you could see voting rights at that point as a compromise, which is that we will enfranchise women with the right to vote, but we're not necessarily going to give them forced representation, because if we don't give them this right, which is becoming increasingly popular, women could revolt, and that would not be good for men. Especially as women were gaining more economic power, because like she was saying, they were getting into the workforce. So it began to transform. So it was a compromise, but it wasn't the total relinquishment of their power. Because then you can just convince those women to vote in the interest of men.
If the ultimate goal, though, of the patriarchy is to maintain men having power, it would occur to me that it would not be to the patriarchy's benefit to allow women to vote.
And they didn't allow women to vote. That wasn't something that men imbued with women automatically. Women fought for that right.
Yeah, the alternative is to have your entire system burn and crash to the ground because people are revolting.
Right, so they give that.
Well, there's actually
it's like appeasement.
There was a fair amount of women who actually, and again, I just want to reiterate, I'm in favor of women voting, but there's actually a fair amount of women who did not want the right to vote.
Yeah, and there's conservative feminists too.
Now, what's interesting to me, though, is that women were able to secure the right to vote without the corresponding responsibility.
Yeah, I think everybody has an inherent right, or should have an inherent right to vote. I don't think you have to sign up to a draft to vote.
But that's sort of the genesis of feminism, is securing rights without any sort of corresponding responsibilities.
I think the men of the patriarchy then should have forced the conscription when they gave them the suffrage, the voting. If they were being smart, they would have forced them. Honestly, of course, I would agree with you that it's unconstitutional. I don't think that men should be conscripted simply on the basis of sex.
Well, right, and that brings us back to the whole thing of, well, the draft is never going away, so what needs to occur in the name of equality is you need to equalize the draft between men and women.
I disagree. I think the draft could theoretically go away.
No.
The vast majority of
the
vast majority of people in military right now, anyways, are people from like military families. And
they're not in combat positions.
The thing is, though, in the event, like, you cannot. It's not a. I'm trying to think. You can't get rid of the draft. I know it's, rainbows and butterflies.
I think you probably
There's other
could.
countries that have abolished the draft.
What's that?
There's other countries that have abolished the draft.
Which ones?
I would not be able to name them. There's countries that don't have drafts in place.
But
I think almost all countries. I'd have to Google this. I'm not familiar with like the draft situation in Cameroon, for example, but.
No, I'm talking like Western democracy.
We need to equalize the draft. Anyways, I do feel like we should try to include some other people on some dating-related stuff. But let's be honest, patriarchy's QAnon for feminism.
It's a cute little catchphrase you got there, Brian.
It's a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory, guys.
Can I just say this?
Sure.
Less than 50 years ago, women were literally, it was illegal for a woman to open a bank account in her own name or have a credit card.
I'd need the fact check.
Look it up. I promise you. I invite you to look that
up. That's cool.
That is
and again, like we can have like a compare and contrast the ways in which
I'm not doing oppression Olympic shit. I
like oppression Olympic shit because here's my whole thing, right? And this whole patriarchy, there's this male privilege myth.
As Warren Farrell taught us.
It's totally dismissed by. Okay, here's the best way I can put it. All feminist arguments about oppression are basically dead on arrival because men have, in fact, been more oppressed than women.
Yeah, you win the victim contest.
Here's the thing. All of women's collective grievances fall flat in the face of just one male grievance, and that's military conscription.
What do you think is like an example of a female grievance?
The very short period, for example, where, and this is actually related to military conscription, the very, very short period in human history where some men or most men were able to vote and women weren't.
Do you think?
It's a very short period of human history because if you look at it, I don't have the exact dates memorized, but for example, if you go back to the 1700s, most men couldn't vote then too. What equalized it was men could be subject to military conscription. They had a more and they could be forced to go die. Because of that responsibility that men had that women did not have, that was the basis for giving men earlier access to having the right to vote. But throughout most of human history, men, most men were not able to vote.
Yeah, you're getting somewhere here with Brian. And what I would argue you're getting at is that, like, hey, guess what? Men have been conscripted, et cetera, but there's always been a certain amount of people in power who never really have to worry about conscription, always kind of had the right to vote, and it's usually men who are rich, right?
It's a very small percentage of men, though. So for the 99% of like the common folk don't receive any of these privileges.
But the point of the whole patriarchy,
it's basically
or the whole
apex.
idea of
it's essentially an apex fallacy.
Yeah, no, wait, let me finish, please.
You're attributing the
characteristics of a few to
the
many.
top treatment of like this top 1% of men. And keep in mind, these men had families and they had wives and they had daughters who also reaped certain benefits. But
I'm going to draw a parallel to race here. I know you say they're different. They are different, but give me a second. Let me make my argument. When it comes to like basically the racial history of the United States, what happened is that you had some really white, wealthy landowners who convinced other people that were poorer whites who didn't have the same benefits as them that, hey, you know what, you are superior than other black people on the basis of your race. And the patriarchy does something very similar, where you have some very rich, powerful men convincing other poorer men, hey, you know what, you guys are superior than women on the basis of your sex. You're more logical, or you're smarter, or you should be entitled to rights that women don't have, or you should be entitled to promotions that women shouldn't have. You know what, women shouldn't even be in the workforce. That's where you belong.
What evidence do you have for that?
Literally all like historical arguments that go against like why women should be able to be in the workforce, or why they should have a bank account, or why they should be able to vote.
Modest donated $200. Chat, can you imagine being as brain dead as Erin and Pixie? Honestly, I'm favoring Demon over these two, even though Demon's tits are out. Wild. Panel, you ever traveled international with a man?
Well, okay. Modest Takama, appreciate your patronage. I mean, I actually want to give credit to Erin. I think she's very sharp and very, very smart. Same with Pixie. So,
thank you.
Definitely not brain dead. I disagree with them though on the feminism, patriarchy stuff.
On our QA, not conspiracy.
Yeah, it's a conspiracy theory. Okay, I want to try to reel in some of the other panelists here. So I feel like we shouldn't linger too long on this, but I mean, just to wrap up my point, basically,
Grid One Motorsports donated $200. More men than women voted for women to vote. Seems women were happy to vote in local elections rather than national. More countries require mandatory military service for both sexes. Accuracy matters.
Yo, Grid One Motorsports. Hey, really thank you, man. Appreciate it. More countries require mandatory military services. Wait, more countries?
Of the ones that still have the conscription, they make women be conscripted to like Israel or South Korea. Like women have to serve also.
I don't
think they have to do combat necessarily, but they do have to serve in the military in a capacity of some sorts.
Well, I mean, most countries, conscription's only male. Mm-hmm. And there's actually in Switzerland, for example, which is a Western country, you actually have to do military service in Switzerland for a couple years. Mm-hmm. What's going on? Oh, okay, yeah. And there's actually ramifications as a man, only as a man, if you don't. I think there's certain, I don't know if, I don't want to misquote it, but I think you guys can look in Switzerland. You have to. There's some sort of fine you have to pay, or that your taxes are a little higher. I could be slightly off here, but there are some negative consequences to men if you opt out of.
There's penalties.
So let's not linger too long on that. But the point I was trying to make is, I think forced military conscription is a bigger grievance than all of women's collective grievances combined. So yeah, and you mentioned, for example, that 50 years ago, women couldn't open checking accounts.
It was illegal for a woman to open a bank account.
I don't know if that's actually true.
I
don't know if that's actually true.
It sounds insane
I don't know if
because of how much progress we've made in 50 years.
what I would say, if we go back to the Vietnam War, that's about 50 years ago too, there are men who were conscripted, which women were not subject to. There are men that were conscripted, that died, that would be alive today had they not been conscripted. And there are men alive today that were conscripted who have suffered terrible injuries or PTSD or saw just absolutely brutal things. So, you know, a lot of people say when I bring up forced military conscription, well, when's the last time there was a draft? There are men, like I just said,